Hi, I'm Matt from Off-road.cc, and the bike I've got here is the Rondo RUUT AL1 gravel bike. This is a bike I've been testing recently and had a lot of fun riding. So it is a bike which has got variable geometry, which is a little bit different, perhaps the only bike that has variable geometry out there. I'll get into the ins and outs of that at the end. First of all, look at the frame and the bike as a whole. First of all, if we look at the frame and the looks of it, I think this is a really nice looking bike. And there's some really nice small touches that Rondo have done to this bike. Things like the stem, which is pretty unique with a flat top and then rounded underneath. Also, little things like the way they've put the graphics and dimensions and stats on the frame. It's not really something that's needed, but it's a bit different and it helps it stand out. Other features on this frame which help stand it out are all the mounts that you've got. I mean, you can put pretty much whatever you want on this bike. So it has got mudguard mounts, rack mounts. You can put a top tube bag and bolt a top tube back down. You have got mounts for a front mech should you want them, and you have got a 3-bolt anything mount underneath the down tube. There's also the 3-bolt anything mount on the fork on both sides. So if you wanted to take this bike pack in, you've got a lot of options for carrying luggage. This is a bike that has been designed in the Czech Republic. And the Czech Republic, a little bit like UK, is very popular with cyclocross. And I think the frame and the design of the frame is a little bit inspired by cyclocross bikes. There is a flat top underneath there, which a lot of cyclocross bikes have to aid carrying. Now, this maybe isn't specifically designed for cyclocross, but there are a lot of touches on it that maybe have been inspired by cyclocross bikes. And I think if you wanted a bike to do a bit of cyclocross racing, but also gravel and maybe winter road bike, this can do a lot of things like that. It's a bike where rather than N+1, it could be an N-1 bike. It just does a bit of everything. Other nice features, you've got full internal cable routing. So rather than have a cable stop just inside there, all of these cables are completely full. So if I move that, you'll be able to see, hopefully, that the cable is completely full, both the brake and the gear. So the gears and the cables should last through the worst of the weather that we get here. And on a day like today, that's absolutely pouring down outside here in Wales. It's pretty typical of what we're riding. There's a lot of mud, and this should be able to handle it. Mud clearance is also very, very good. We've got a 700 by 40 tyre fitted to this bike, and the clearance is huge. So if you wanted to go, I think you'd get a 50 in the front if you wanted to push it, and in the back, you definitely get a 45. Quoted tyre clearance is a little bit lower, but I think they've been quite conservative on the numbers they've given. Moving on to the drivetrain fitted to this, and it's a SRAM Apex drivetrain. Now, the Apex is towards the lower end of the tiers that SRAM do, and if I'm completely honest, that is evident on this bike. It is one of the lower points. This shifting it's not brilliant, it's not crisp, and there's some frequent mis-shifting that happen just because of the shape and the type of the levers that they have on here. You can set it up as good as possible, and you're still going to have fairly slow shifting. It's just not as crisp and as clean as some other options, and especially GRX if you're comparing it to a GRX bike. This particular bike is fitted with an 11 to 42 cassette on the rear, which is quite a large range on that, and then a 42 on the front, which is quite a big chainring. If you wanted to do some bike packing, that's going to be quite a big gear. But for general gravel riding, especially if you're doing some road in between as well, this could then be a good fit. And the riding that I do, this combination has been really good. I've not run out of any gears, but then also when I've been riding on the road to get to off-road tracks, it doesn't feel slow. You've got a nice fast, got a nice big top gear. What also helps there is the tyre that they've put on, which is a WTB Nano. And it's quite a good all-round tyre, but it rolls well on the road. It's a little bit noisy, but otherwise it's very good. And for our typical winter muddy conditions. It does handle pretty much everything really well. It's a bit of a jack of all trades as a tyre. It's not the fastest, but it is very good for typical British conditions. Looking at some of the other finishing kit, we have got an on-brand seat post, and it is an inline seat post. Not many brands are putting an inline seat post on, and I think that's a little bit because of the more aggressive, faster geometry that you've got on this bike. Got a fabric saddle, which is really good, own brand stem and own brand bars. And I really like the shape of these bars. There's a little bit of flair to them, but what's really good is the shape of the tops with a slight back curve and then a sharp angle onto the hoods. Just makes for a really comfortable position to be riding both on and off-road. What you can maybe see on this bike, and it's a bit because of how I've set it up, it's quite an aggressive bike. It's a fast gravel bike. It's not a bike that I think would be too suited if you were doing a lot of technical riding. It's quite low at the front, even with the variable geometry. Whichever setting you have that in, it's quite low at the front. The head angle is fairly steep, and it just puts you in a very fast, and for me, my personal riding style, I really enjoyed it. It's a nice, fast, enjoyable position to be in. If you're doing any events, any long distance things, I think this could be a really good option and a nice type of bike to be riding. Then looking at the wheels. So Rondo, they are again own brand wheels. They have an asymmetric rim, and that has a 23mm internal, which puts a nice fat profile onto these WTB Nano tyres. They're 700 by 40, but they actually measure up at 44mm at the widest point. That gives a really nice ride quality. It plumps them up really nicely. So if you are doing rougher stuff, then that extra width is really welcome. What I think might be down to the tyre and rim combination of this particular bike, because it is a pre-production bike, is we had a real job trying to get the tyre off the wheel. Now it took two of us to try and unhook the tyre off the bead. And I'm not sure why this is. Once we did manage to get it off, tried 3 other different tyres of different brands, and they all fitted fine. You could seat them and inflate them fine. But this particular combination, and I'm hoping it's only this bike, it was a real nightmare. If I was out on the trail and I had a puncture and needed to put a tube in, myself, I probably wouldn't be able to get that tyre off. I've never had that issue before, so I do hope that it is just because of this particular bike that we've got. Next, moving on to the brakes, and probably, in my opinion, the weak point of this bike as a whole. They just aren't powerful enough. You've got some modulation there, so there's a little bit of control, but when you want absolute maximum stopping power, they just come up short compared to the competition. They've got 160mm rotors, everything's as it should be. Checked all the performance, the pads are fine, but they just lack ultimate stopping power. If you're coming down anything technical, anything fast, and you really want to stop, there have been a few times when I just haven't had the confidence in the brakes, and that's a bit of a shame. Moving on to the variable geometry, which is probably one of the bigger selling points of this bike. And for me, although it's not a bad option, it just doesn't make as much difference as people might expect. It doesn't completely change the bike at all. The difference is quite subtle between the 2 settings. So you've got what's called a TwinTip, and it's a chip on the fork on both sides which you can flip around, which changes the head angle by approximately 0.5 degrees. It also changes the reach and it changes the stack. Now how much it changes that depends on each size of bike, and they change slightly more or less depending on the size. So when it comes to changing that chip, it actually takes 4 tools, and it takes quite a lot of time as well. So you need a 6mm to remove the axle, to remove the wheel axle. Then you need a 2mm screw to be able to remove the grub screw holding the twin chips in. And then you need a 4mm to take the caliper off the fork. And then finally, on this particular bike, which I'm assuming it would be the same on other models as well, you need a T25 Torx to take the brake caliper off the adapter. So it's a bit of a complicated process, and then you've also got the problem where in one setting you need the adapter and in another you do not. So if you're swapping it, you've got to hold on to that adapter somehow. And then also when you're putting it on, when I was changing it, the first time the adapter went on upside down, it's not clearly marked which direction that needs to go. The positions are called high and low. Now, a little bit confusingly, or confusing to me at least, the high position is where the bike is lowest, and the low position is when it's highest. And then for the difference that it makes, now I did a ride where I changed this multiple times and did a short loop and did the exact same loop on the high setting, then swapped it to the low, and then I repeated it to do 2 laps on each setting. I timed it and tried to see if there was any difference between the 2 settings. Now, I could feel a slight difference, but it's only marginal, and in terms of time, there was no noticeable difference. So as far as I'm concerned, the difference is really subtle. And I think if you were buying this bike, you'd either maybe experiment to start off with, or you might not even bother adjusting it at all. You'd look at what you're using the bike for, and then maybe set it up and leave it there. Because it's a little bit of a faff to swap the settings around, I just don't think that many people are going to do it. I could be wrong, maybe it's different. Maybe someone's got one of these and they do change it frequently. Maybe let us know if you do that. But for me, I think I would set it up in the high position and just leave it there. So this bike in the UK retails at £1,800, and this bike, when it came out of the box without pedals and without any bottle cages and things like that, weighed 10.03 kilos. Not that I'm a weight weenie and counting grams. It's actually quite a light bike. For this price point, it's a very competitive weight. And I've also found it's just been a lot of fun to ride. It's a bike that's quite aggressive in either setting. If you're doing maybe events or faster riding, not so much the technical or bike packing, I think this would be a really good bike. It also could potentially be a really good winter road bike because you've got all the mounts, because you can put mudguards on, and you've got the option of running a 2x or a 1x and the faster riding position. This could be an option for maybe someone who's looking for a bike that could be a winter road bike, and then maybe in the summer it becomes a gravel bike. It could do a lot of things. It's really adaptable, really fun to ride, and yeah, it's a bike that I also think just looks really nice.